Thank you. All right, so on our outline that we've been working through, we have come to the fourth part of this first section that we're looking at, the confirmation of Christ. I struggled with what to call this section, and I struggled with whether to break it up a little bit or not. But after going through it again this week, I actually changed it 3 or 4 times before I printed out the lessons, and I came right back to the same thing I had to begin with. So we'll just stick with confirmation of Christ. Beginning here in chapter 4 in verse 35, and then going through chapter 8 in verse 30. We'll just read through it, and you listen. If you have any suggestions on something different to call it, you let me know, and we'll do that. All right. Chapter 4, verse 35 begins, "On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side.' Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?' And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, 'Who can this be that even the wind and sea obey him?'" All right. So number 1 on our lesson sheet, what was the reaction of those who witnessed what Jesus did? What was their reaction? They feared, and they wondered. Notice it says there. But they feared him. Why did they fear him? Who is this that is fearing him? It's his disciples. I mean, he's already chosen the 12, and obviously the 12 are going to be with him. It talks about other little boats, probably other disciples are also going along with them, but it's his close group. And they feared. Up to this point, we don't see Jesus doing much more than healing and casting out demons in the record of Mark. And so that's what they have witnessed. They have witnessed Jesus healing. They've witnessed him casting out demons. But here what we begin to see is a little bit more demonstration of his power. A little more demonstration over the things of nature and other things. And so this miracle that he performed here, it takes the disciples off guard, and so they're very concerned about this. This section that's leading up to Peter's confession is filled with these types of actions, showing him as the anointed one. What does this say about their belief in Jesus? Aside from Jesus saying you have no faith. Now, aside from that, but thinking about their reaction, what does this say about their belief in Jesus?
Still have doubts.
There are doubts, or at least misunderstandings, about Jesus, about who he is. And so it's possible that they believe in Jesus without really having a full understanding of what all of that means. There's a lot of people today that believe in Jesus, but they don't really understand who Jesus is. They don't really understand what that belief in him should entail. And I think we see that in the disciples. All right, chapter 5 it begins with this demon-possessed man. It says they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. Yours may say Gerasenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains. And the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me." And he said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." Then he asked him, "What is your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the swine, that we may enter them." And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine, and they told it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one whom had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened and who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he had got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you." And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. All right, so number 2. Why did the Gadarenes or Gerasenes ask Jesus to leave? Fear. Yeah, they were afraid. Okay, we see some of that in there. All right. What else might it
Getting rid of their livelihood.
be? Yeah. I mean, are we talking about 2,000 pigs destroyed? I mean, he interrupted the livelihood of some folks. You go to messing with people's money, and that's a problem. That's a problem. Now, this is obviously a Gentile region, because the Jews are not going to put up with pigs, being around them. But when we think about, all that they saw, of course, they're causing the pigs to die. Their reaction is based on what? What is it that they see in Jesus that made them say, "Get out of here, go somewhere else"? He had power they didn't understand. We have them having a misunderstanding of Jesus. Did we not see the same thing with the disciples? We saw the same thing with the disciples. Second part of number 2, what was the reaction to the news of his healing in Decapolis? We notice there that the demon-possessed man begged him that he might go with them. Jesus told him no. What did he tell him to do? Go home and what? Tell it.
Is this the first time that's happened?
It's the first time in Mark's record that we see that happening, that Jesus tells someone to go tell it. All right? And this gives us an idea, a little bit better idea, why he was telling people, don't tell anybody about this. And then all of a sudden he says, go proclaim it, go tell it. Okay? Why is he telling this man to go tell it?
Spread it to the Gentiles.
What?
Bring the gospel into a new area.
Okay, bring the gospel into a new area.
Spread it to the Gentiles.
Spread it to the Gentiles.
Is it time for him to let people know who he is?
Is it time for him to let people know who he is?
We're still not getting it.
We're not getting it. Every time you see Jesus, and he's going to do this again, he's going to say, don't tell anybody. Every time you see Jesus saying, don't tell anybody, he is in that region trying to preach the gospel. And if they went out and proclaimed it, which is what happened a lot of times, you have a swarm of people that come around him wanting to be healed, and he's not going to be able to get into the cities and teach. Well, in this instance, he's already being run off before he can do any teaching. And so he tells this demon-possessed man, no, you go on and proclaim it. You go on and tell it. Later on, Jesus comes back through Decapolis. And we don't have a direct correlation, Scripture saying that this is the reason or whatever, but we see a little bit different reaction in that area. Okay, maybe not this specific region, but in the area of Decapolis. And so it's interesting to see that. It's interesting to put those things together. They don't believe because they're skeptical. That word that says marveled in verse 20, it says, and all marveled. That word kind of gives the idea, most of the time, a negative sense of the marvel. In other words, they're kind of skeptical. It's like, really? Is that really right, what you're telling me? It's that kind of a marveling. So it seems possible here that what it's saying is they don't really fully believe what this demon-possessed man is telling them. Maybe it's because they don't all know the demon-possessed man, or maybe it's because, no, that thing doesn't happen these days, whatever the reason is. Any thoughts or anything on that before we continue? Okay. Let's look beginning in verse 21. Now, in chapter 5, verses 21 through 43, I had to put all that together because it all goes together. And we've got a couple of different instances that are going on. Maybe I won't read all of this. This is where Jesus is faced by Jairus, and his daughter was sick, and he asked Jesus, will you come heal my daughter? And so he says, yeah, I'll come. And on the way, you remember the woman who had an issue of blood? She comes up and touches him on the hem of the garment, and so we have that whole episode going on there. And then we go back to Jairus, and we'll see some more things that are involved in that there. Okay, so we'll look at some verses here in just a moment. Number 3, what made the woman well? If we go and we look in verse 31, his disciples said to him, verse 32, he looked around to see her who had done this thing, but the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. So what made the woman well? Her faith. It was her faith that made her well. She believed not only in Jesus, but what he could do. There was nothing holding her back from being made well. Note that there is no indication either way if she thought he was Christ. Now, probably she did. Probably she's had some of this understanding. But at the very least, she understands that this man has the power to heal her. And so it is that faith that has made her well. What did Jesus tell Jairus when he found out his daughter was dead? Immediately after that, notice in verse 35, while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, but what? Believe. Believe. And so Jesus tells him, don't worry about it, just believe. What is the multitude's idea of Jesus? How do they view Jesus? It kind of comes out in that we read there. All right? He's important and shouldn't be troubled with these things, you know. What do they call him? Teacher. They call him teacher. Now, obviously, they understand that he has more powers than just to be able to teach. Okay? But that's their view of him. We don't see them confessing that he is the Messiah or anything like that. That we see them, you know, talking about him as teacher, that sort of thing. And I'm talking about the multitudes. You know, we have a few people here and there that will confess that. But as far as the multitude is concerned, they really just believe that he is a teacher from God, a teacher from God, who has a lot of power. But when we think about some of these, like, you know, Jairus, for example, and the woman who touched his garment, you have to think that they believe a little bit more than the vast multitude, than the rest of the crowd. Okay? And so, but it's just interesting to see some of those things. Jesus encourages belief in him and his ability to raise her. And so he continues to go and do that. What was their reaction to her being raised? All right, yeah. Look in verse 42. It says, immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. What does your version say?
Completely astounded.
Completely astounded. Astonished. All right. Anything different? Amazed. Does it have greatly amazed? Totally amazed. Yeah. So you've got those adjectives that are, and adverbs that are in there playing with that. The reason why that is, it's all one word in the Greek. It's all one word in the Greek. What the translators are trying to do is they're trying to convey what that word is talking about. It's stronger than just being amazed. They are overcome with amazement. If you look at the definition of the Greek word and how it's used, it gives the idea that they were hysterical. They were hysterical. They were so overwhelmed by emotions that they were kind of, you might even say that they were out of their mind with joy, you know, with excitement, excuse me, those sorts of things. And so it carries with it a loss of senses, a loss of control. They were overcome with that. So remember that whenever you're reading through and you see that word overcome with amazement. It may or may not be talking about that same word, but that's what's going on here, is that loss of control over excitement. All right, so continuing on, do you have anything else on that before we continue? I'm moving a little quicker this morning because I wanted to get, to a certain section. But if you have something, I don't care a bit. All right. Beginning in chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, it says, he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, Judas, Joseph, Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country, among his own relatives, and in his own house. Now he could not do many mighty works there, except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Then he went about the villages in a circuit, teaching. What was the reaction of those from his own country to his teachings? What does it say there? What? Unbelief. Okay, we'll get to that in just a minute. But notice what was their initial reaction. Astonished. What else have you got? They took offense. They were offended. All right. So they're astonished. They're offended. The word astonished here gives a similar, though not as strong, sense as that other word we were talking about being overcome. It's not as strong as that that we saw earlier. They were gasping at his teachings. You might say that, kind of catches your breath. Like, I can't believe he said that. I can't believe he's talking like that. They were thinking that he was, I don't even know what I wrote there. They were thinking, oh, okay, all right, I see it. I didn't write it very well, but, it's the idea, who does he think he is? Who does he think he is? I mean, this is a man that they know, or they think that they know. He grew up there. They know all of his family. And here he is coming in here and acting like he's this high and mighty teacher. He's just a carpenter's son. I mean, what do they know? That's the idea. That's the idea that they're putting forth there. Why could he not do many mighty works there? Because of their unbelief. Because of their unbelief. Mark is helping the reader see why he was rejected by many. Many people, they're seeing the signs, they're seeing the thing. I mean, if you notice there in verse 6, he says, at the end of that, he says, "And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands?" Did the people of his own country see the things he was doing, the power he showed? Yeah. They saw it. They saw the evidence that he is who he says he is. And yet they rejected him. They did not believe. They did not believe. And so the fact that he is the Christ is evident, but the people at the same time, basically they choose not to believe it. They choose, I've seen it. You remember David Copperfield? Listen, that was the magician, you young people, that was a magician of my age. I don't know who they're following nowadays. They've got some crazy stuff going on. But he was it, and he performed some mighty works, didn't he? I mean, things that I, to this day, cannot explain. I'm sure there's an explanation for it. I don't know how he did it, how he set it up, all those things, but whatever. Do I believe that he has magic? No. No. Because I know too much. Did you notice that they mentioned wisdom? Did you see that? What do the people of that day think whenever someone performs a mighty work? Sorcerer, maybe. Yeah. Possessed, maybe. But you'll notice they have a belief that wisdom is connected with that. Whatever way, they feel like if someone has enough wisdom, they can do some of these things. When you go over to Acts chapter... he's in Ephesus. I don't remember which chapter it is. I think it's 19, where they have the riot in Ephesus. Well, before that riot and everything happens, what you learn is they are burning their books of magic. You see, that's the idea. If you gain enough knowledge about some of these things, you can perform, special things. When we talk about the Simon the sorcerer there in Acts chapter 8, it is that kind of a thing. They were amazed at the things he could do. Well, a lot of things that they did was due to wisdom. He knew what chemicals would mix together to make a poof of smoke. He knew what things that he could do to make red water turn blue, or, whatever it might be, he would perform these signs to get people to believe in him. And so whenever we see some of these things and we wonder, why on earth did they not believe Jesus is the Christ? They have this preconceived notion in their mind, as to why someone can perform powers and wonders. Now, what Jesus performed is far above anything that anybody else had ever done, obviously, and we saw that with Philip in Acts chapter 8, because Philip was doing things that even astonished Simon the sorcerer. Say, ain't nobody can do that, that sort of idea. And so whenever we wonder why it is that they don't pay attention, some of that has to do with their idea of magic and different things of that age. Yes?
Were his brothers and sisters and mother there also? Or were they just discussing that they also live in this city? Because I'm just wondering if they were there, why didn't they stand up? They didn't really believe him either. Not that Mary didn't, but...
Right. Well, I don't think Mary did either at this point. Possibly. Okay, and that's from what we studied last week. So what she's asking was, is Jesus' family here, or are they just saying that that's his town? And I think probably there's not any indication they are there present. Okay? But we do see that, back in chapter 3. Yeah. In chapter 3, verse 31, then his brothers and his mother came, and standing outside, and they sent to him calling. You go back up to verse 21, his own people heard about this, and they went out to lay hold of him, for they said he is out of his mind. I don't think, Mary, yes. I mean, we know from the early age of Jesus, she's paying attention to things, but it does not seem that Mary fully understands at that point either. And so that's a possibility. I'm not saying that's true necessarily, but it appears as that may be the case.
I also thought she always did, because she kept them in her heart. And
yes.
It never dawned on me that she wouldn't have believed it.
Well, you think about the same type of language. We're talking about, how she kept those things in her heart. And we read that there whenever in Luke chapter 2, I think, is where, because, he's 12 years old and, all of that event happens there in Jerusalem where she kept those things in her heart. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she fully understands. You go back to Genesis chapter 37 with Jacob and Joseph. Okay? He and Joseph's mother kept those things in their heart. But we find very readily, too, that they really didn't understand those things either because of the way they reacted to a lot of those things. And so just because they're keeping those in their heart, they're keeping it in mind, but it may not come to an understanding as of yet. Now, let me say this. We don't have any indication the other way either, that as far as right here in chapter 6 is concerned, whether she has an understanding or not. Okay, we just don't know. Yeah, so that's a good point. In John chapter 2, Jesus and his disciples are invited to the wedding feast. And she knows something about him at that point. But it's just hard to say. It's just hard to say. I believe I died. I felt it. I'm going to turn this other mic on. All right, yes.
When the angel Gabriel came to her, she believed. And when she went to Elizabeth, she believed. She knew who God was. She knew what he did.
Yeah, and that's true. When the angel came and explained to her all these things, and we see that in Luke chapter 2, the Song of Mary and all that. So, yes, she believes. But as I said, belief in Jesus does not always equate to a full understanding of who he is. And we see that with other people as well. Yes, she knows that he is supposed to be the Christ. Joseph's father, or Jesus' father, knew he was supposed to be the Christ. But whether those, I was reading something at some point in time about geniuses. Those who seem to really get everything. They really don't have any more knowledge than what anybody else does, unless they're actually digging and learning all those things. What the difference is their brain connects it. Something is different about them that helps them to make those connections with all that knowledge. There are a lot of things in this world that I knew a lot about, but I didn't really understand until at some point those connections are made. Yes, she knows that he is the Christ. She believes that he is supposed to be special and supposed to be doing things, but from that episode in chapter 3, we learn she doesn't fully understand. Okay? And so, and it may just be because she's hearing reports wrong. That could have been the case as well. All right. Ready to go on? All right, verse 7. Now, this section I'm taking all the way through verse 31. So I may not read all of this, but I want to read some of it. And he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. Also he said to them, in whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from that place. And whoever will not receive you, nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in that day of judgment than for that city. So they went out and preached the people that people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. Now King Herod heard of him, is what the New King James says. I'll talk about that in a minute. For his name had become well known, and he said, John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him. And then we have kind of an explanation of all of that, and we saw that in the book of Matthew as well. And then in verse 30 it says, Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both that they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while, for there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. Okay, so what happens while the 12 are out preaching? What happens while the 12 are out preaching?
Herod heard about it?
Yeah, Herod hears about it. And so that's what the indication is that Mark is pointing out here. It is while the 12 are out preaching. The Greek text simply says that Herod the king heard.
Is this the same Herod that was king when he was born?
No, this would not be the same Herod as when he was born. No, this is a different Herod. Herod the Great was the Herod that when he was born. I don't remember. This may be Herod Antipas. Does anybody remember? Anybody got that? What? Does it have Antipas? Okay, all right. So Herod Antipas would have been the one who was in charge whenever, that's who Pilate sent him to at the crucifixion, that sort of thing. Yeah. All right, so the text simply says, now King Herod heard. Okay, and so the indication is that what King Herod is hearing is he's hearing about the preaching that is going on that the 12 are out doing. And so that's what Herod is hearing. So what does that tell us about what they're preaching? I know it says here that they went out and preached that people should repent, but what do we have an implication here? What are they preaching? Jesus. They're preaching Jesus. Because that's what we see here. For his name had become well known. Okay? And so Herod is hearing the preaching. The name of Jesus is becoming well known because the 12 are out there preaching in the name of Jesus. And so they are spreading his name. All right? How does Herod react?
He thought it was John the Baptist.
He thought it's John the Baptist. He thought it was John the Baptist. Now, let me ask you. All right, the name of Jesus is being preached. Repentance is being preached. Do we have any indication that they are preaching that Jesus is the Messiah? I don't see that. I don't see that. And I don't know either way. I don't know either way whether they're preaching that he is the Messiah. And I don't know how to answer that. But it's just something to think about. Yes.
Over and over and over, he calls himself the Son of Man, not the Son of God.
Yes.
It's in John, he calls himself the Son of God, but in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it calls himself, but the demon possessed man, the demon called him the Son of God.
Yes.
And when he told you to go tell that, he said, go tell what the Lord's done for you. And sometimes he would say the Son.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, and that's really what I'm getting at is they're not, Jesus is not point blank saying, I'm the Christ. He favored the term Son of Man. That's what Jesus favored. He favored calling himself the Son of Man. Now, that has implications. You go back into Old Testament scriptures, and that has certain implications behind it. But as far, and like you say, the demon-possessed man, the demon that was in him called him the Son of God. All right? And so is that what the demon-possessed man, after he's been cleansed, is that what he's proclaiming? That he's the Son of God? We don't know. We don't know. But either way, Herod does not believe in Jesus. And that's what we need to see here from that. He doesn't believe in Jesus. He thinks this is John the Baptist come back from the dead. So he doesn't believe in Jesus and who he is. And I find that interesting because it indicates here that Herod feared John. And he would go periodically to John, even in prison, to hear him teach things. Do we not think that John is preaching to him, hey, there's somebody else coming? It's interesting. It's interesting to see all that. All right. Anything else on that before we move on? I know that just raised a lot of questions, didn't it? And we didn't answer none of them. How about that? Oh, my. Is it? Okay, we got one more question. Let me go through this. So beginning in verse 32, we have to go all the way through the end of the chapter. And the reason why is because all of this is connected in some way. So, first of all, what we see is they're departing to a deserted place, but the multitude see him departing, and they knew where he's going, and they run to meet him there. They see the great multitude, and then what does he do for them? Feeds them. Okay, this is the feeding of the 5,000. All right, and so he's feeding these people, and then we get to verse 45, and it says immediately after feeding them, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed the mountain to pray. Now when evening had come, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straying, and at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walk in the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and cried out. Okay, verse 51, he gets into the boat, the wind ceases, and what does it say? They were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. I'm going to end right there because I'm going to actually separate the next verse 53 out into a different section. But I want us to, we had to do all that together because of verse 52. Because of verse 52. All right, so let's answer these questions. What happened after Jesus fed the 5,000? Right. He had the disciples go across in the water. They're having trouble getting across the sea. Jesus basically joins them in the sea, walking on the water, gets into the boat. What happens to the waves? It ceases. The wind ceases. Everything goes calm. All right, what was the reaction of the disciples to Jesus' actions and the results? They were afraid. Okay, I don't see the word fear in mine. Does yours have fear? Amazed. Okay, that's before, but I'm saying after the winds have ceased and he gets into the boat.
Utterly astonished.
They're astonished, utterly astonished. They're greatly amazed.
All of this had happened. This unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
And they're worried about loaves.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that all of this, the calming of the sea and everything? In verse 52, Mark points out they had not understood about the loaves. What has the loaves got to do with stilling the wind and stilling the sea? Isn't that interesting? So they're greatly amazed. Again, these words can be from a positive, negative, or a negative aspect, but here it's indicated as a negative sense. They lost their minds over Jesus. They just didn't know. They didn't know how to act or anything. It's like, what is this all about? Why? He walked on water, but I mean, you remember they went across the water and it was stormy and all that stuff, and he got up and said, "Peace, be still." Were they not there?
Is it because they're seeing more?
Maybe whenever Jesus got up, they just went to sleep. What do you say?
Is it because they're seeing more of his powers?
Is it because they're seeing more of his powers? Maybe. It says they marveled. That kind of gives the indication that it is a sense of disbelief over the signs that he's doing. Definitely a misunderstanding. They still do not fully understand who Jesus is. The verse 52 gives us the idea of why they don't believe. What does it say? Because of the hardness of their hearts. It's because of the hardness of their hearts. So when he does make the mention of, for they had not understood about the loaves, and so that he's connecting all of that together. But you think about what happened with the feeding of the 5,000. They bring Jesus this food, and what does Jesus do? He blesses it, and then he begins to break it and disperse it. All right? The disciples don't really see that happen. They don't really see it. However it works, they don't really, or if they see it, it doesn't register in their mind that Jesus actually did that. Now, in John's account of the feeding of the 5,000, we find that the people, they were ready to make him king over them feeding him feeding them like that. But we don't have an indication that they really understood that that was a miracle. Isn't that interesting? Because that's what he's saying there in verse 52. They had not understood about the loaves because of the hardness of their hearts. They were not willing to see what was right in front of them, even his disciples. Yeah. Ephesians 3:18. Ephesians 3:18. All right, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width, length, and depth, and height. Okay, well, I was going to make a point. 4:18. All right. I'm going to read verse 17. This I say therefore and testify in the Lord that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart. And I think that that's exactly what we're talking about here. They have been so long in this world and lived so long a certain way, they just can't fathom that these things happen. And that's the way it is with a lot of the people that don't believe. But that's the reason why I put all of this in this same section, because as we continue to go through this section, we see the change. We see how they begin to see who Jesus is. And then it ends there in chapter 8 and verse 30 with that. And that should say 33, I think. But in verse 30, I believe it is where he says, where Jesus, no, oh, that's right. It's verse 29 where he says, you are the Christ. Peter can, they get to that point eventually. They get to it eventually.
It's funny that not even one of them would try to convince the others that they all just didn't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, she said it's interesting that not one of them spoke up and tried to convince the others, of what they saw, And we don't have, look, now let me say this. In verses 51 and 52, we don't have a strong indication that they did not believe. Okay? What we have is an indication that they did not understand. All right? So be sure that we make that distinction there. All right? We've had 2 bells, right? Okay. Well, I'm done unless y'all want to talk about something. We don't have kids yet, so. All right, we'll leave it there.